Explained by the Meier contacts, mysteries, myths, legends, conspiracy theories, historical inaccuracies, and more. Compiled by David Chance, revised October 18, 2023.
Malon or Malona of Phaeton or Tiamat planet. Phaeton hypothetical planet. Zakaria Sitchin, Ideas and Works Asteroid Belt Askids Explanations Part 1.
3rd February 1953. The Earth human has become capable of destroying his world in an atomic explosion, which would bring very dangerous consequences for the entire system. Already once, millennia ago, a similar catastrophe was released in this solar system, namely, as the planet, which was the second human-inhabited one of this system, was destroyed. Through the irrationality of the humanity who lived there at that time, the planet was blown up into thousands of smaller and larger pieces, and thereby a flourishing world was destroyed. As the Earth's sister planet, it orbited the Sun in the position where now the planet Mars goes its way. But, through the mighty first explosion, a gigantic repulsion effect was produced, and the planet was catapulted away to finally explode in the orbit where it now circles as the asteroid belt. The name of the planet was Malon, which then later, because of its destruction, was changed and underwent a slight alteration. At that time, Mars circled in the present day's asteroid course and was driven into a closer solar orbit through the violent destruction explosion of the planet Malon. Malon's solar orbit was, therefore, at that time, there where Mars now circles, whereas this situation was, however, altered through the destruction. The planet of that time is today named Malona or Phaeton, etc.
Contact Report 004.
The Earth human must become familiar with the thought that his ancestors had brought the whole humankind and the Earth itself to the brink of ruin and had to partially evacuate the planet in a wild escape. But it should also serve him as a warning that greed for might and barbarism are deadly attributes. That this is the case has also been experienced by a second race in your solar system. In their boundless hatred and in their uncontrollable greed for might, they destroyed themselves right down to the last, and hardly any being survived the fight. They annihilated and destroyed their own planet in a tremendous explosion, and nothing remained of it but many thousands of asteroids that still orbit your sun today, as a memorial to the deadly irrationality of human beings. Remnants of the once splendidly blooming planet Malona, which its inhabitants destroyed in their barbaric greed for might and irrationality.
Contact Report 005.
In doing so, they came across the system of the earthly sun. They settled here on 3 different planets, namely on the Earth, on Malona, and on Mars, and began with the building of a new culture. But the planets were still rather inhospitable and often hostile. So they left the planets again and paid them visits only now and then.
Contact Report 070.
So the expedition ships set off again and after many years reached the Sol system, where they forced 3 different planets under their rule and began to build a new culture. However, these planets, Earth, Malona and Mars, were still extremely inhospitable and hostile to life, so the majority of the expedition fleet left the worlds again after a few years, leaving only a few behind, who slowly faded away and joined the animal-looking feral descendants of those earlier abandoned ones millions of years ago, as well as the pure Earth-born ones. The scientists of the Pleiaria system, like their earliest ancestors, left the Earth to its natural development, making expeditions and monitoring visits only here and there, and then leaving the human beings who had become completely wild and were now left there to their hard fate. This lasted many thousands of years, Then, when the idolism had been abolished in the Pleiaria systems and the leader Pleiaria had died, a new intelligence developed on the earth through the descendants of the feral abandoned ones, which led to the fact that the Pleiaria system inhabitants, who were constantly observing the earth, came forward with new expeditions to earth and once again built up a culture in the same manner as they built up a culture on the fourth planet, namely on the world of Malona. Still very barbarically inclined, however, power struggles broke out again among the new settlers after less than 300 years, which led to the fact that the Earth had to be vacated by an order under force from the home systems. Malona, on the other hand, remained inhabited because the population there remained peaceful. But this only lasted for barely 40 years, and then the greed for power among the two different peoples also took hold there. And before any orders could be made from the home systems, the Malonians destroyed each other and destroyed the whole planet. Since then, the debris of the once beautiful planet between Mars and Jupiter has been orbiting the Sol, the system's sun, as a long-lasting memorial to human madness.
Contact Report 150.
After the discovery of the moons around Jupiter, scientists now reckon that they will also still find some undiscovered satellites around Saturn, but nevertheless, there will still be a surprise for them.
You think because of the Adonis, some of which orbit millions of kilometers outside Saturn?
That is of correctness. These small planets, called Adonis, as you correctly say, are so small that they cannot be detected and seen from Earth, at least not at present, because the necessary instruments do not yet exist. A large part of these small planets will certainly be detected by various probes and Earth-orbiting telescopes, which will cause some confusion among scientists.
I can imagine that, because there is quite a large number of them orbiting Saturn, besides the few small wandering Adonis that only pass by this SOL satellite from time to time. But I can understand why they are not visible from the Earth, because on average they only have a diameter of between 10 and 50 kilometers, if I remember correctly what Ptah and Simyas explained to me back then in the year 1975. In addition, there are supposed to be some smaller ones, as well as larger ones at a huge distance from Saturn.
That is of correctness, but you should also know where these Adonis came to Saturn from.
Of course. Simyas said at the time that these small satellites were in part larger fragments of the planet Malona, which had its orbit between Mars and Jupiter before it was destroyed and torn into thousands of pieces by an explosion unreasonably produced by the human beings there. While the greatest part of the destroyed planet orbited the Sun as an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, some small groups of Adonis separated and flew out into space by the expansion forces of the planetary explosion, a larger group of which then came into the gravitational pull of Saturn, which has since held them as tiny satellites, which at the same time means that they are not actual moons of the unfinished solar planet, but just immigrant foreign bodies the size of Adonis, while the number of Saturn's actual moons is only 29.
That is of correctness.
Contact Report 213.
The exact year of Emmanuel's birth was 5 years before the Christian calendar known today. At that time, there actually was a very large and unusually strongly radiating comet that was observable from the Earth, which we call the Fruitful One, because from very early times, inseminations for the Earth and for the planet Phaeton, respectively Malona, have gone out from it, whereby life could develop on these two SOL satellites. The Fruitful One, however, has an extremely long period of revolution on a path that leads far out into the Oort cloud. Accordingly, it will take more than 11,000 years, according to Earth's measure of time, before a return of this comet occurs in the SOL system. Its orbital period is 13,200 years.
Contact Report 228.
Moreover, it must be said that the name Phaeton is completely misused. For Phaeton was the planet that was destroyed by its inhabitants, namely Malona, which broke into thousands of pieces and today forms the asteroid belt. With regard to the planet Malona, that is to say Phaeton, it is also falsely claimed that it was the planet from which the Earth and its moon sprang. Tiamat is an old Earth language term for the planet Phaeton, that is to say Malona, which was destroyed by human irrationality.
Contact Report 238.
A further question would therefore be of that relating to that asteroid, which is to penetrate next year into the area of the Earth. Maybe it would be interesting to know if you know where the meteor and its companions come from.
We could not clarify their origin very precisely because it is possible that they come from the system of Uranus, as they are remnants of the planet Malona, but also from the two outermost ring systems. The latter seems to be much more probable, because the age of most of the meteorites of this cluster coincides with the structures there, and their materials are also of the same kind. But if these wandering meteors came from the surroundings of Uranus, then the materials would have to be younger. But one thing I can say for sure is that this meteor group did not go on its journey through the destruction of the planet Malona, but that the wandering planet destroyer was the triggering factor. From now on, it was 8 destroyer passes ago, when this traveling planet got into the area of the asteroid belt and catapulted several small asteroids out of it. These, however, gradually got further and further away from the destroyer until, after almost 1,600 years, they finally became independent and took their own path, which they have followed ever since, and which leads them again and again to the sun and into the vicinity of Earth.
Contact Report 251.
The rest of the peoples who were genetically manipulated found their way from the Sirius areas to the SOL system, where several thousand rebellious genetically manipulated peoples were punitively abandoned in many diverse places on the Earth, while the masses of the numerous different races of peoples found a new home on the planets Mars and Malona, Phaeton, where they built cities, pyramids and stations, etc. Malona, that is to say Phaeton, on the other hand, was destroyed by its genetically manipulated and former Sirius area, inhabitants in fratricidal wars, and caused to explode by leading a river or sea into the subterranean, that is to say submarine magma chambers of a gigantic volcano. The asteroid belt contains the remnants of the former planet, which at that time did not orbit where the asteroid belt is today, but at the place where Mars orbits the Sun today, while Mars was where the asteroid belt is today. This change of position was caused by gigantic upheavals, in which the destroyer was also involved. The places, that is to say the planets and solar systems, where the two yellow races settled beyond the galaxy, the Milky Way, as well as Mars, Earth and Malona Phaeton had been chosen as effective hiding places by the well-meaning ones, by the escape helpers of the genetically manipulated ones, and had been kept secret from the creator rulers for all past time, because if they had found out the whereabouts of the ones who had fled, then they would have sent out punitive expeditions to have the refugees eliminated. So one party fought with the other in fierce verbal battles and accusations until other intelligent beings of the Sirius territories interfered, to which the party of those who were in favor of killing the genetically manipulated ones joined. The really well-intentioned ones, the killing opponents, succeeded, however, in spite of many countermeasures of the ones who wanted to kill, to save large parts of the gene-manipulated ones in several groups through escape, whereby, as already explained, 2 peoples were settled beyond the Sun, central galactic sun, on the other side of the galaxy, while the remaining peoples found a new homeworld in the Sol system, on Mars and on Malona each, while several thousand degenerating gene-manipulated ones were abandoned on the Earth. As has already been explained, in the Sol system, 2 planets were suitable for the refugees, the genetically manipulated ones, Mars and Malona, Phaeton. The Earth was still quite inhospitable, and the atmosphere was such that, at that time, it was quite detrimental to the human life forms from the Sirius regions, which is why only those fallible genetically manipulated ones, who became aggressive and malicious against their own allies, were abandoned on this planet. At that time, 5 races, or the remnants that continued to be persecuted, had fled from the Sirius regions to Mars, while 2 other races fled beyond the Sun to the other side of the galaxy, as has already been explained. In addition to the 5 races that fled to Mars and Malona Phaeton, there were also 2 different races from the Creator rulers, which of course were not genetically engineered and therefore had no changes in genetic information. These 2 races were the benevolent ones who were well disposed towards the genetically manipulated ones and helped them escape. They themselves came from 2 different planets in the Sirius regions, which were completely overpopulated, which is why there was a ban on procreation, as a result of which all children were killed if any were born, despite the ban, while the parents who contravened the ban were sterilized and sent into exile. The gene-manipulated ones who finally settled on Mars and Malona and their well-meaning traitor-creator rulers developed a technologically superior culture over time, but this did not prevent them from one day having to flee the planet again. This happened as a result of the scientists one day realizing that the Sol system was much more unsafe from a purely cosmic point of view than was originally assumed, because many comets and wandering planets as well as meteors, etc., endangered the 2 newly settled planets Mars and Malona Phaeton over and over again, whereby such rushing space rocks also crashed down on the planet several times and caused immense damage, as well as destroying countless human lives. In the elaboration of the new possibilities of emigration, there was again dispute among the distant descendants of the genetically manipulated ones, into whom the genetic manipulation by inheritance was also transferred. The decisive factor for the outbreak of the quarrels was, to a not inconsiderable extent, a new doctrine, which was created by the well-meaning ones, who said that they, the well-meaning ones, were the creators of the gene-manipulated ones or their distant descendants, to whom absolute obedience and worship had to be paid, for they were the highest existing ones, namely the creators and producers. This, however, was not the opinion and demand of all well-disposed people, which resulted in 2 different camps, one being the camp of the alleged creators, and the other the camp of those who remained well-disposed in every respect and distanced themselves from a creatorship. So there was a dispute between these 2 camps on the one hand, and between the followers or believers of the 2 parties on the other. In the end, the disputants agreed that all those who were willing to do so should simply leave the planet Mars for the Earth and Malona. So it happened that many human beings from both camps finally joined forces to emigrate together, one to the planet Malona or Phaeton, and the other to the Earth. The emigration leader to Malona was a certain Zentikon, the strong leader, who was assisted by his wife Amalaka. She goes her way. The emigration leader to the Earth was also 2, namely a certain Semos, who looks at things, and his brother Passus, keeper of freedom. While the atmosphere on Malona was breathable and healthy for the emigrants and for the peoples already living there, and corresponded roughly to that of Mars, which was as much as that which the descendants of the genetically manipulated ones were used to in their spaceships over many millennia. This did not apply to the Earth. Then everything came to be as the scientists had predicted. The destroyer invaded the Mars orbit and tore it away with it into another Sol orbit, whereby it was from now on in the same orbit as the planet Malona, which migrated then, however, later, likewise by the forces of violence of the destroyer, in order to live its existence there, where it was then destroyed many thousands of years later by his inhabitants, in order to become the asteroid belt. The inhabitants of Malona were decimated by the emigration catastrophe at that time from about 470 million people to about 14 million, after which they recovered again and had a population of about 52 million people again with their planet destruction. Those who emigrated to the Earth lost contact with Malona and Mars, which had become completely desolate and on which all those left behind had perished. Thus the old Lyrans were not the actual inventors and founders of the original religions with their god-creators and creator-gods, but they were only the unscrupulous beneficiaries of the equally unscrupulous creator-ruler descendants, through the religious legends and fables of religion as well as fables of gods and fables of world origin, etc., which were brought into being. On the one hand, to cover up the real origin of the SOL system humans from Mars, Malona and the Earth, and to let them fall into oblivion so that they would not one day find their way back to the Sirius regions. And on the other hand, so that quarrels and wars would arise among the genetically manipulated precisely through the religions, whereby they should exterminate themselves, so that they could never come up again and start their way back to their original homeland.
Contact Report 519.
Some of the Earth foreigners who came to Earth, due to errors in coordination, strayed directly to Earth instead of reaching the Lyra system. Others were looking for the planet Malona Phaeton, which they did not find, but came to Earth in their search.
Contact Report 533.
The size of the planet Malona of Phaeton was about the same as that of Earth. But the asteroids created by the explosion only correspond to a part of the destroyed planet, as your daughter Simya say, and also Quetzal once told me. The total mass of all asteroids together should be less than the total mass of our moon. So where is the rest of it?
What has been explained to you is correct, and the small mass of all asteroids together consists in the fact that the majority of the planet was blown away with enormous force as a single piece during the explosion. This was hurled in the direction of the gas planet Jupiter and was finally attracted and swallowed up by it.
Contact Report 662.
Evil in terrestrial humans arose because a very long time ago by a distant Pleiaran descendant humanity beyond. The Dern universe space-time structure many still later immigrated, very distant Pleiaran descendants were turned by manipulation into merciless warrior slaves who had to fight against foreign aggressors. Later, some genetically manipulated peoples fled and penetrated into the space-time continuum of the Dern universe, and into the space-time continuum of this present. That is to say, into the area of the Milky Way galaxy, where they settled on the planets Phaeton, Malona, and Mars. In total, they were around 78 million people, of whom around 280,000 also emigrated to Earth.